all of you know, this meeting is being recorded. Um, Thanks for coming and joining us for this month's Artist Think Tank with me. I'm SueAnn, as it says in my name thing, though the profile picture is Simon's, because I'm using the institutional account. And if you've never met me before, you want some background, I do a bunch of stuff. Right now, I'm currently living in Taipei, Taiwan, where I'm doing a master's in musicology. But before that, I lived in Nashville for almost 10 years, or I guess 8 years, 10 years. And then I worked in the music industry and I actually studied music business for my undergraduate degree. So that's kind of the background that I'm coming from. I've done a little bit of everything in terms of management work, music publishing, like the technical creative side with songwriting and producing and engineering, and so here to share what I know about how, if you are interested in breaking into the industry as, a music industry professional, or you as an artist or creative want to better understand how that world works and the tools to navigate it. And also, I'm really excited to share more about kind of creative opportunities that exist more behind the scenes, that beyond being just like an artist and a recording artist. So the first thing I want to do, though, is I just want to get started with introductions. So name, pronouns, where you are, if you want to share your social media handles, artist page, or music that you have, that'd be great. And then why did you join us today, and what questions are you coming in with, so that we can make sure to answer all of those for everybody. Does anybody want to start?
I can go first.
Thanks.
My name is Ting Lin. My pronouns are she, her. My location is Washington, D.C. And my social media handle is at Tinglin Music, Tinglin Music. I joined today because I love the Slants Foundation. It's been supporting me in so many different ways. And I'm always just, here to learn and grow as an artist, and also see how I can help others, through the knowledge that I get. So I'm really curious to learn about all the different jobs in the industry and, and what else I can do other than being an artist. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Think you got a hot potato. You guys probably know me. I'm Bao. I'm here in Los Angeles. Pronouns are he, him. I'm here to support everybody and answer any questions that I might be able to answer in addition to SueAnn's presentation. But I'm also very sure I can learn a ton from SueAnn and all of you guys too. So just here to be part of the community. Yusesh, why don't you do it?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
My name is Vishesh. My pronouns are he, him. I live in Burbank, so maybe like 5-10 miles away from wherever Bao lives. And I work in the film industry, so I'm pretty new to music production, but I've been learning it in my free time. And I'm trying to figure out more about how the music industry works because it's very foreign to me. And how about Kathy?
Hi everyone, my name is Kathy. I've been coming to the artist think tanks since they started in last winter. My pronouns are she, her. I'm located in New Jersey, kind of close to New York City. I used to live there, but moved back here when the pandemic started. My social handle Instagram is at KathyZhao13. And I'm joining today because I'm really interested in learning about like careers in songwriting, and SueAnn and I met at one of the first few think tanks, and I reached out to her and wanted to learn more about careers and songwriting. That's something I've been doing the last 3.5 years while working in marketing, and just curious to learn more, like how does one like get into a career as a songwriter, and like how do you make it work? Yeah, I'm really excited to hear more.
Hi everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. My name is Crystal. I came to a few think tanks a little while ago, and I've been, oh boy, I've been swamped lately. But I finally had time to come to a think tank this week, this month. So I was looking forward to it. Oh, my pronouns. Sorry, my pronouns are she/her, and I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. My social media handles these days, I'm like pretty much only on Twitter. But it's Six Color Studios. I put it in my nickname so that we don't have to discuss which six it is. Um, and I don't know if I have any questions. I just want to learn more. I'm in the same boat as Vishesh. Like, to me, it's just very foreign, and I feel like I don't know enough about the music industry.
I totally understand that. I kind of always grew up loving music and trying to do every sort of kind of like extracurricular that was available to me, but I didn't really know anything about how the industry worked or how to get into it. And I also, like, my family didn't know anything either. You know, my dad was an engineer, my mom's a nurse. Like, they don't know people in the entertainment industry. They're not connected. They're immigrants, right? So they couldn't really help me with any of this. And that's actually why I ended up going to college, is because I was like, I need to make connections. I need so much I want to learn that I need to learn. And thankfully I found a program that actually allowed me to learn all the things that I wanted to learn about how things worked, because I think it can be a really mystifying experience. And a lot of, I think what the music industry runs on is kind of a smoke and mirror show where only certain kind of people get access, and you know that keeps power away from people with different backgrounds and marginalized communities from being able to break in, especially because, like, people, it's a cliche, it's not what you know, but who you know. I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, right? There's no good knowing a lot of stuff if you don't know how to connect and work with other people. But I think that's true of all kinds of businesses, right? Not just the entertainment industry. So you'll probably see a lot of familiar things today that we'll talk about, that if you have any sort of business background will kind of make sense. But I'm gonna break down some of the finer points of some of the dynamics between different, specifically, I would say, income streams, as well as understanding copyright and how what the product is and a different situation can then be like, oh, well, this is the product, and then this is where the money comes from, and then who gets what cut of what money. So those are some of the basic questions we'll be asking today. Um, you know, the my first day of music business 101 in college, we were reading this book called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business by Donald Passman. It's like a very, very famous industry book. If you're interested in reading it, you can get it off the internet or a bookstore. And Donald Passman is an entertainment attorney, and he basically breaks down all the different kinds of people there are on a team and what their jobs are and what their contracts look like and what they get paid, because he's a lawyer. And it's kind of, they put out a new edition every few years and they update it. It is kind of a very kind of sterile way of looking at everything, because he comes at it from the position of a lawyer, but it can be helpful. This idea of a team, though, I think is really important, because I remember maybe almost 10 years ago, Macklemore had his debut album that got really big, the one with Thrift Shop on it, and he won the Grammy. And then he went up on the stage and he said, this is for independent artists everywhere who are doing it on their own. And I remember it sparked a conversation at the time. I was in college, and we said that the truth is, there's lots of indie artists today, but it doesn't mean you're doing it alone, right? You always need other people. And just because you don't have a record label anymore, it doesn't mean that work that a record label does goes away. It just means somebody else ends up doing it. So here I just kind of created like a really basic diagram of some of the people you might be meeting. We were going to talk about today the entities, businesses, and people that you might have on your team or be working with at different times. And I also wanted to break it down into this kind of like overly simplistic diagram of like the two main spaces that you vacillate between. One is the office, which is you can think of in like conceptualize as the business side, and one is a studio, which is more of like what we would say the creative and technical side. And it's not to say there isn't, you know, movement and overlap between some of these things, but it helps us to think about the kinds of work that we're doing, specifically some as being like business work, administrative work, and the other end as being creative and technical. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was income streams. So I created this diagram to kind of explore the idea of like what are some of the main income streams that a performing artist has. So, you know, in the past, it used to be mostly recorded music when, you know, they used to sell millions and millions of like vinyl records and CDs, and eventually, you know, the iTunes store, which no longer exists. And now we have streaming. And so basically anything that makes money from recorded music. So that could be like even on TikTok now, you know, all the songs that they have on there, they pay small like licensing fees in order to use those little recordings. So, or Spotify streams are a really obvious one as well. If you hear a song on a television show or a movie, right, that some of the money for that is for the recording that they're using. They have to license that. Then there's a portion which is music publishing. And so what's the difference between like music publishing and recorded music historically is the difference between two different companies. One is the record label and one is a music publisher. So the record label, they make their money from the recording of the song, right? But the music publisher, they actually are in charge of the song itself. So we'll get more into this later in detail. There's also merchandise, right? Like everyone knows merch. That's a big, big income stream now for artists, and touring, playing live shows, selling tickets, that sort of thing, performances. And perhaps, you know, you get sponsorships or endorsements or do things like that. So, you know, here's just like a general idea. So record label, that's the thing people hear about the most. I feel like, you know, when you watch a TV show or a movie and they talk about the music industry, they talk about labels. So, you know, there are some major labels like Universal and Sony and Warner, but then there's also lots of indie labels like that are substantial players in the industry, but you know, they are independent. Asthmatic Kitty, Sub Pop, Matador, those are some examples. And I put you here, and this is going to be really cheesy because I kind of put it through for all of these different slides. But at the end of the day, most artists these days are their own record label. So what does a record label do? They manage the distribution and the marketing of recorded music. So like I mentioned before, in the past, that was physical product. And they had distribution partners to make sure all your CDs got in your Best Buys and your Tower Records and your local, you know, music shops. And then there's also radio, which is a huge one, promoting to radio. Like, how does music get on the radio? Well, they have specific people whose job it is to go and talk to DJs and to pitch them music and to try and get them to play on their radio shows and playlists too. You know, everyone knows about like Spotify curated playlists now. Well, there are people whose job specifically is pitching to playlists because it's a huge part of what music gets discovered and played these days. So where could this be? Well, you know, the big label offices, you know, they're going to be in the major music hubs like LA and Nashville and New York City. But, you know, a label could be anywhere, a startup. You know, you can run a label out of your living room or your garage or your basement. And I know for me, for the music that I've released, I am the label for myself. So, you know, wherever I am, wherever I'm doing work is my label. And I think Bao does a lot of his own stuff. So, you know, his label is wherever he works and gets stuff done. And the question of when do you need a record label, or when does a record label get involved? So a record label, they can get involved before music has been recorded. Historically, what they do is they give you money so that you can afford to record. And then after the music, or like after the music has been recorded, to market and distribute it. So, you know, a lot of times these days, an indie artist might finance as well as self-record their own music, which means that they own all of it. And then they put it out independently, and then maybe it starts to do well, it starts to pick up interest, and then a record company will come along and say, hey, like, what, we want to partner with you to maybe distribute or market bigger and to handle some of this stuff. So then they'll sign you, and then in that case, usually like they just get a cut, like a commission kind of the money that they're helping you make. But usually that means that you own your masters, and masters are the master recordings. You own your recordings, and they just make some money off of when you make it. So how does that work? I think one of the most helpful things my professors ever told me was, just think of a record label like a bank. And they loan you all this money early on so that you can make your record, which is like your house. That's the mortgage. So you can build the house. And then, all the money that the recordings make, they pay them back. And eventually, if you pay back all the money that you borrowed from them to record, then you start to get royalties from that. But at the end of the day, after you pay off all the money you borrowed from them, they keep the house. Which is why so many people feel really cheated by the traditional historical label model, and have tried to negotiate alternative kinds of deals where they get to own their own masters, or the model we have a lot now, whereas labels serve as distribution. Now that a lot of distribution is on the internet, it's really easy to just pay like TuneCore or DistroKid or one of those small distribution companies to digitally distribute your music for you. So you don't really need the structure anymore. Labels do offer, different kinds of services in terms of marketing and like other sorts of like scalable things if you get really successful and you need more help kind of managing the financial parts of it and collection on that. But they make, like, historically, a record label, they only make music off of the recorded they only make money off of recorded music. But because of the way that recorded music has started to diminish in terms of value with the way the industry has changed since piracy and then going digital, they have started these things called 360 deals. So a 360 deal is basically like I have a slide here so you can see like they historically only take the money, which is like from the recorded music that I've highlighted. But in a 360 deal, their idea is like they want, because there is no artist, there is no industry, there is no other money, there's no money for music publishing, there's no money for merchandise, there's no money for touring, etc., all those things, unless there's recorded music. They want a piece of the whole pie, which is new, right? It's the way that they're making up for the money that they're losing. And 360 deals are really common now, but a lot of artists, really powerful artists, have like tried to negotiate against that because they don't feel like it's fair for them to get the whole pie when they usually and historically only got a slice. I can see it from both sides, but obviously I'm going to advocate for artists and not big corporations for all this time. I do think that for independent labels, you have to, who don't have huge budgets, who don't have a lot of money, you end up figuring out a way to work together so that it's mutually beneficial and not exploitative. So the next thing we're going to talk about is music publishing companies. And so, as I mentioned before, there's a difference between a record label and a publishing company. And so, like I said, they handle the song here. So let me give an example. The song "I Will Always Love You" was originally written by Dolly Parton a long, long time ago, in I think the 60s, when she was like in her 20s. And she is an artist herself, but she's also a songwriter. And at the time, Elvis Presley really wanted to record "I Will Always Love You." But back then, he had a thing where he would buy the song of all the songwriting copyright of all the songs that he wanted to do. And Dolly Parton didn't want to give up the ownership of her own song in order to have Elvis record it. So she hung on to it. And then, decades later, Whitney Houston re-recorded her version for The Bodyguard, and it became this huge hit, made millions and millions of dollars. And so you can see that there's the song itself can exist beyond just one recording. You can write a song and so many people can record it, and there has to be kind of an administrative like process, as well as a copyright specifically for the song. It's kind of interesting because it's hard to think of a song existing beyond like a piece of paper or like an MP3 file, but the song kind of exists in abstract. And yeah, a recording can help us to like hear and understand the song, but the song itself is kind of this like floaty intangible thing. And then there's all the other ways that it can be made, either like in print or in recording. But a publishing company, they manage all of the songs, which is what we call a catalog, right? So a publishing company, what they do is they manage a lot of the administrative stuff. So like they will register your copyrights for you with the U.S. Library of Congress, and they will keep track of all the songs, and they will usually fund your demos and other administrative work. So like a demo, right? It's different. It's basically a recording that exists only for kind of people in the industry to hear. It's not a finished recording that they plan on releasing. It really exists just so people can hear the song, and then other people might be like, oh, that's a cool song, I want to record that as an artist for myself. So they can be really big advocates for people, because they can set you up on co-writes with other artists or bands or songwriters. And they can also, the big thing that publishing companies can do is they can pitch your songs to other artists. So, you know, the big companies, again, they tend to have offices in the music hub cities. And like for me, I don't have a publishing deal with a publishing company, so I do all the administration and the work for my own songs, which is not that many. But the question is when do you get a publishing deal? When do you start to work with a publishing company? Well, there's generally like there's the artist way, which is like if you get a record deal and you're a songwriter, they're going to usually set you up. Like if you get signed to a major, oftentimes they'll sign you to the publishing company that is like the arm of that same label. They technically operate as different companies, but it's like they want you in the family, you know, whatever. But if you're just a writer, then it works a little different, and it's a lot harder to kind of figure out a way forward. So specifically in Nashville, we have a reputation for being a writer's town, because we have a really robust songwriting community and a lot of people who aren't recording artists or performing artists. They just write songs that get pitched to other artists to get recorded. There's only a few industries that really do this. I would say country is one of them. Pop music is also one, and then maybe Christian music. And pop music obviously happens more in like LA and New York, and then Nashville's big thing is country music. So, you know, they will schedule these co-writes. Sometimes the artist wants to write with a bunch of songwriters to get songs to record for their new album. Sometimes the artist just wants to hear songs that have already been written and then decide whether they want to record them. And so the publishing company helps manage all of this. And people do work for a long time. They just writing with other writers, networking, and trying to get like a foot in the door in order to get the attention of a music publishing company to sign them and then kind of bring their work to the next level. Sometimes though, like, you know, let's say your friend has a band, you're not in that band, but sometimes you write with them. And then that band starts to get really successful. They get a record deal, like, and some of the songs you wrote with them are going to be on their album, or they're doing really well. It's sometimes possible that a publishing company will reach out to you because they're like, oh, this is a hot property. there's money to be made here. This person's already making money, and maybe this writer has talent, and I want to keep, you know, uh, help them grow their talent and their network and write more songs in their catalog so that we can all make money together. I mean, the worst version of that is so that they can make a lot of money that we can take, or the best version of that is we can make money together. So so that's kind of the when. It's a little complicated. We'll talk more a little bit about that later when I get into like the songwriter stuff. And then how does that work when you sign a deal with a publishing company? Like usually it's kind of like 50-50. So, let's say that, you make so much money, like $100, like, and then they're like, okay, you get $50 and I get $50. And for the duration of like the deal that you sign, they will kind of like own your songs, your catalog. But legally, most of that stuff actually reverts back to you in the end, which is different than the way a record label works. But yeah, like that's one nice thing about catalog. Something, I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with this story, but the Beatles catalog is owned by the Michael Jackson estate. That's something that people kind of note sometimes, is that for like the Beatles, for instance, they signed a record deal, and then they have a publishing company, and so all the songs that they wrote are like basically owned by this publishing company. And then the company got bought by the Michael Jackson estate. So in that case, it's like, wait, the Beatles wrote all these songs, but they don't own their own songs anymore because a company owns them, and then that company got bought by like Michael Jackson's company. Okay. So that's an example of how like songs are kind of like stocks, and sometimes publishing companies, they just want to buy them because they see them as investments. And when you have a catalog like the Beatles, like that those songs are just going to keep making money. So it makes sense, to buy them and as an investment. So like I said, here's our chart where you can see that this is like the music publishing part of the pie, and that's where the music publishing money takes their cut. So management company or manager. So managers are individuals, and then they usually have companies. Sometimes that company is just like them, one person, but the bigger companies, they might have a bunch of managers who all work together. So, probably one of the more famous music managers of our generation is Scooter Braun. Some of y'all might know he's Justin Bieber's manager, and he started out actually when Justin was just on YouTube, and he thought, this kid has talent and I want to try and help give him a career. So he reached out to him, and they built obviously a really huge career together. And along the way, Scooter became a really well-known music manager. So he manages like Tori Kelly and Ariana Grande and a bunch of other really big A-list musicians now too. And then there's also management firms like Red Light Management. You often hear stories like in Behind the Music or other sorts of industry bios about family members or significant others, like husbands, a lot of times for female artists, being their managers. It ends up kind of just being a who's there and who can kind of help me in this situation. So for the what here, I said, what doesn't a manager do? It's kind of a catch-all job, and it can sometimes be, like, oh, I'm going to go pitch your music to all these record labels and publishing companies and all these other, trying and get you to get all these connections for you when you don't have anyone. That was something that like Scooter Braun did, for example, when he and, Justin Bieber were both kind of nobodies. And then, but oftentimes I think the big value of a manager is just someone to talk to kind of give you advice, to bounce ideas off of, in terms of like, what kind of artist do I want to be? What kind of career do I want to have? Like vision and direction and strategy. And that's the part that I think is really, really valuable about management, especially if you are someone who doesn't know a lot about the industry, to have someone who knows how things work and what standards and expectations should be in terms of like professional relationships. But managers, they're so involved in different parts of your life in many ways. Like, it can be a very intimate relationship because, like, for instance, if you're having a mental breakdown and you can no longer tour as an artist and your manager says, okay, you need to take a break and I'm going to go handle all these things and cancel all these tours and do all these things, that's somebody who's advocating for you, who's on your side. If you have somebody who in that situation says, no, you just got to push through and keep working, that's obviously an example of how that can be toxic. So, management companies, they have offices again, but oftentimes managers, like, it might be just someone in your life who you trust to be there for you and to help you with things. And when is a good time to have a manager or be a manager? I think that, if you're interested in being that person who kind of helps manage business stuff and to help guide somebody, you can just start off. You can just find artists and musicians, maybe they're your friends or family, or you just scout for people. And then what you do is you just reach out to them and say, like, I want to manage you and I want to help you build your career. Right. Or, sometimes people try to get jobs at management companies in order to then become a manager. That's another way to do it. There's also, I think, like I mentioned before, I think it's valuable at all stages of your career to have somebody kind of like that by your side who's helping you with all those things. But it's really hard sometimes to get a manager in the early stages of your career because of this next bit I'm going to talk about, which is how do managers get paid? They get paid on commission, which is like a percentage of the artist's earnings. Back to the like circle that the chart we looked at, they get a little bit of everything because they're involved in everything. And usually it's like somewhere between like 10% to 25%. It depends on the negotiation you do. And if you're not making any money, then it's kind of like a manager feels like, well, what's the point of doing all this work? You're not making money, then I'm making 10% of nothing. And so it can be hard early on because you're doing all this stuff on spec, and it means that you're doing all this work and not getting paid. So some of the artists I've had kind of management relationships with, sometimes they're specific managerial services that they have you do, and then they pay you hourly for that because they know that they're not making enough money yet to pay you, 10% for it to compensate you well. But in those cases, like, it's a very specific, like, they're like, I want you to do this, this, and this, and then you give them an invoice and then you bill them. Sometimes for me with young artists, I do consulting. So like, I just charge, like, let's sit down and talk about your career and make a plan for you and talk about strategy and vision. Like, I'll just charge for, like a consultant. But I just really want to push this here to be really careful of scams. I've actually had multiple friends who were in early stages of their career who had people come to their parents and be like, your daughter is a star and I want to manage her and I want to help, like, make her famous and successful. And then you need to give me $10,000. This has actually happened to multiple friends of mine. And, their parents, they really believe in their kids and they really want to support them. And so they give these people all this money because they think, like, well, I don't know how to help my kid. And this person says they do. And so, yeah, maybe that person will help do a couple things, set up. I know that for both of my friends, those managers, I'm putting in scare quotes, they helped connect them with recording studios and, help them to record some music. But in the end, the music wasn't very good. And they just ended up taking a lot of money from them and dumping them. So, yes. Yeah, don't overpay. Fairly good advice from Bao on that. It's really hard because people have dreams and, people want to chase those dreams and other people dangle that in front of you. So I always tell everybody whenever, like, you hear about, oh, this person says they can do this for me, or they want to do this for me, but they need this much money from me. I'm like, no, a legit manager takes commission. They don't make money unless you make money, or if like you know that your manager isn't making any money and you need to like you want to throw them some cash and make sure their work does get compensated, like you can figure out a billing structure. So like I think I had a friend who was like, okay, I can only afford like you for 5 hours a month. You know, I'm gonna pay you like $20 an hour for 5 hours a month for your management services, and then you know, like, okay, here's $100. Like, but you know, it's really hard to make $1,000 from music a month in order for them to get that 10%. It's the same. So yeah. Anyway, obviously, you know, if you bet on the right horse as a manager, then, you know, since you get 10% of everything, that's a lot of money if they have a lot of money, but it's not a lot of nothing if there's a lot of nothing. So the next thing, so the thing people often get confused is the difference between a manager and an agent. And so an agent specifically, like we'll talk about here, an agency has to do with booking. So this is where there's a lot of overlap with the film industry, because most of these big talent booking agencies also do like Hollywood stuff. But it's a little bit different than the way that careers tend to work in the music world, because for acting and such, like your whole job is getting gigs, you know, getting a movie, getting a TV show, getting a commercial. But as we saw in the chart, you know, like for musicians, like touring and performances and stuff, it's just one part of your career. And there are lots of artists who don't perform live and they only do recorded music. So, you know, here are some names of some pretty big agencies that are out there. And, you know, if you don't have an agent, oftentimes you are booking your own shows. So, you know, like I said, if you're an artist and you are calling up venues and saying, I want to play a show there, how do I get a gig? You are your own booking agent. And I actually had a friend who was an indie artist who literally did everything pretty much that we just discussed on this list for herself. She was very talented. She double majored in songwriting and in marketing. And she was so good at booking these national tours for her little indie band that other bands that she performed with were like, wait, can you help me book my shows? Because you're so good at this. Can I pay you money for you to do the same thing for me? And so that's an example of, you know, like someone who's an independent booker. And there might be people, you know, in your town who do a lot of booking and can know all the people at different venues, and usually they have established relationships. So, you know, that might be an example of someone who's like an independent booking agent. But yeah, like what do? They negotiate contracts. How much are you getting paid? And, you know, what kind of needs do you have? Like, do you need one microphone or 3 microphones? Do you need there to be a drum set? What kind of PA is there going to be? Okay, is there going to be food there? Is there going to be water there? Is there going to be a space for us to change clothes? Those kind of things. And like I said, again, all the major agencies have offices in the big cities. You know, little independent bookers are you. If you're booking yourself, you can work anywhere. And when do you need a booking agency or an agent? Basically when you play shows, when you need someone to help book you gigs. And again, agents get paid on commission. So, you know, let's say someone says, like, you know, hypothetical situation, the agent comes to you and says, okay, I got a gig for you, you know, this stable wants someone to come play Christmas carols at their Christmas event for an hour. This is actually a real gig that I did when I was like 17. And, but there was no agent. I was my own booking agent. So like, we'll give you $100 to play, you know, Christmas carols for an hour while, you know, we like ride people around in like sleighs and stuff. So, you know, the agent, the person who negotiated that deal, they would get $10, you know, 10% of that 100. And that's, you know, that's an example of that. Okay. These I'm going to try and go over really quickly because it's even more dry. No offense to business managers and entertainment attorneys. But, you know, a business manager is basically an accountant. And there are some accountants and business managers who specialize for musicians and entertainment industry people, but there's also just major accounting firms or even like smaller accountants that take on folks. If you know, obviously you have accounts that specialize in all sorts of different kinds of business, and music stuff is just another kind of business. There are kind of quirks to that people who are specialized in that know better. But you know, they manage the money, the accounting, they help make sure you like set aside enough money to file your taxes, that you're paying those correctly, and if you have employees, payroll. And you know, anywhere there are accountants. And you know, starting off, it might be easier and cheaper to do your own books and to manage your own stuff. But, you know, after a while, it might be time to hire an accountant or business manager. I know that Bao did a really great session talking about kind of the business of music and a lot of that own stuff about how do I manage my own business stuff. And accountants often bill hourly, right? And they might have a retainer or like a management fee. And then, you know, entertainment attorneys, you know, they're law firms, they draft and negotiate contracts. You know, they might often deal with lawsuits and stuff like copyright infringement, but the majority of it is contracts. And, you know, there are lawyers everywhere, but not everyone specializes in like the deal points of entertainment law. So, you know, you might have a dad or a cousin or somebody who does a totally different kind of law, and they can read a contract and kind of help you get the gist of maybe what is there. But they might not understand specifically what some of the language and the deal points that are in some of these contracts are, or what's expected or standard in the industry. So, you know, negotiation, when you need an attorney, like it can be a really big hit in the pocket because, you know, like the first time I talked to an entertainment attorney, which is like a friend of mine, she told me she charges $300 an hour. And that she could help me craft a set of kind of like contracts for me and my clients that I could just reuse, like a kind of like a form for me, and she's like, you know, it'd probably take like 3 to 5 hours, but then you'll have those and then you can just keep using them forever. And I thought to myself, I don't have $1,000 to $1,500 just to drop on attorney fees. So it would have been nice at that point if I had been making enough money to spend it on that. But I couldn't really afford it at the time. So all of the contracts I've used have just been off of like forms, sets on the internet that I edited to kind of fill in the blanks of what I needed. And but you know, obviously if you're going to sign a record deal or like a serious publishing contract, it really is important to make sure that it gets looked over by someone who knows what it's talking about. You know, if you don't have the experience to understand all the points of the contract, it's probably worth it to get an attorney. And you know, if the other side is, you know, paying money for an attorney, it might make sense for you too as well. And lawyers, again, bill hourly, and they may have a retainer. That's generally how that works with how people get paid. And now we're going to kind of get into some of the more creative and technical ends of things. So a songwriter. So, you know, we talked earlier, there's career songwriters, but, oh yes, an IP attorney, intellectual property. Thanks, Bao. Yeah, IP is intellectual property. It's kind of a bigger category than just entertainment law. But yeah, that's another part of that stuff. A songwriter, anyone who writes a song, right? In the most basic, simple terms. But, you know, we tend to think of artists as people who write songs. And, you know, there's a difference between a performing artist and somebody who wants to, you know, perform the song, and somebody who might want to write the song. And, you know, if you're a member of a band, you know, you might be the very quiet bass player who writes a lot of songs but doesn't want to sing or do interviews. Or maybe you're a producer, someone who just likes to be in the studio and to, you know, make these things, but you don't want to go on tour. That's actually the case for me. Is not really a huge fan of the idea of spending most of my life touring on the road, which is why I kind of shifted my career from wanting to be a performing artist to wanting to be a writer, producer, engineer. And write songs and or lyrics. Some play instruments, some don't. For example, Sia, the really great pop artist, she doesn't play any instruments, and she's actually a really well-known songwriter. She has her own artist career and she's performed and put out music as herself, but there were long periods of her career that she really just wrote music for other people, and because she didn't really want to deal with the pressure of being a public person, which is a big reason why she kind of like came up with the whole like wig thing where you can't see her face. Which I think was like a really creative solution to dealing with the pressure of public attention. So songwriters often produce scratch tapes or demos, which we mentioned earlier. They're recordings not meant to be released, but can be used to pitch the song to others who might want to record it. And where, you can be a songwriter anywhere, but, a big part of songwriting has to do with your relationships. And the big question, if you're a songwriter who doesn't want to be a performing artist, is who is going to perform your music? So if you write with somebody all the time who is a performing artist, then that answers your question, because like they want to perform those songs they've written with you. If you are just a writer or composer in abstract and you don't know who's going to record your music, then you need someone to pitch that music to people to get them to record it. An example of a very, very famous career songwriter is Max Martin. I don't know if some of y'all are familiar with him. He's a Swedish dude who's written so many #1 hits. I can't even count them, but think of all your big 90s pop stars like Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys, and then even onto this current era with like Katy Perry and Tori Kelly and Ariana Grande. Like Max Martin, most people don't even know who he is, but he's the guy who's written, most of your favorite songs on the radio. And, he tried to have an artist career, but it just was never successful. He was much more successful as a songwriter, who all these pop stars would record his music. So he has like his own kind of like production company and wing of people and songwriters. There's like a whole pipeline of really talented Swedish songwriters and producers in pop music that are kind of like, I call it like the Max Martin camp. I think the name of their production has the word Wolf in it, Wolf Brothers, something like that. Anyway, when anyone can write at any point. Some bands, they only write with each other for themselves. Ryan Tedder is a really good example. He is from the band One Republic, which I don't know if anyone remembers anymore, but that cat has written songs with and for everybody. Yeah. One Republic is unforgettable. And for instance, there was like a scandal. It's not really a scandal, like a faux scandal a couple of years ago, because Kelly Clarkson and Beyonce both recorded 2 songs that sounded very similar to each other. One was Beyonce's song was Halo, and then I think the Kelly Clarkson song, does anyone remember? I'm blanking on it, but everyone said these songs, they sound like exactly the same, and we're like, isn't this like a copyright violation? No, it's not a copyright violation, because they were written by the same guy. And he actually just tweaked a song that he wrote. He wrote totally. Oh, Already Gone. Thank you, Crystal. The song for Kelly Clarkson is Already Gone. He basically wrote like a backing track and then different lyrics, and then pitched it to 2 different artists, and they both recorded it. So it's not a copyright violation. Definitely, it's a little weird, but no laws were broken. And like I mentioned before, there's a couple different ways to do that as a songwriter, but usually you really need the help of a publishing company to kind of be your advocate and to help you deal with the admin and the pitching. One of the really big places there's money right now is what's called a synchronization license, which is the money you get when your song is synced to a visual. So that might be on television or movie or a slideshow, I guess. I mean, you like that's technically like an audio visual synchronization, but so you see, let's say we'll do the Whitney Houston "I Will Always Love You." That was in the movie The Bodyguard. So there's the recording of the song, which was recorded by the film production, which is owned by the record label, but then the song is owned by Dolly Parton. So the movie has to pay a certain amount of money for the recording, and then they also have to pay a certain amount of money for the license for the song. So that means Dolly Parton also gets paid for that. Radio, traditional terrestrial radio play gets paid for songwriters, but not for performing artists. So, for example, "I Will Always Love You," Whitney Houston, plays on terrestrial radio 24/7. But none of that money goes to Whitney Houston or the record label for that. All the money for terrestrial radio play, is specifically this license called a performance license that gets paid to this collection company that gets paid to the songwriter and the publishers. So there's like so many more nuances to the details of how this kind of specific copyright law works, which we don't need to get into today, but if someone's interested, I'm happy to share. And we'll talk in a second about mechanical royalties, and how songwriters get paid from recordings. So, but before we do that, I'm going to talk about what is a producer. Well, a producer, like as we've noticed with some of these creative jobs, like one person can have 5 jobs, one person can do 1 job. All of these things can kind of overlap, especially in a creative situation. And a lot of times today, producers are often songwriters or vice versa. So a vision, if you have a vision for the arrangement and the recording, especially if you're in a pop music today, when you write a song, a lot of that is the track, right? And so usually that's the producer. This producer made this track. So, some producers are artists, they're are musicians that go and produce for other people, I'm trying to Ryan Tedder could go produce for another artist, and he is his own artist as well. There are session musicians, recording engineers, songwriters. Like I mentioned, Max Martin, might be credited as a producer on something, though I think he kind of tends to avoid that. And then sometimes people say, well, what is a producer? And it's kind of like what a director is for a film. They take the lead on the project. They manage schedules and budgets, booking space, and session players. But if you're just a starting out artist and you don't really have all these people working together with you, a lot of times you end up being the producer yourself on your own recording project. And a lot of those same responsibilities, artists or the recording engineer or an artist manager. So where might you find a producer? Some producers have their own recording studios, and sometimes you book for other spaces. And when it's basically a part of this creative writing process. And then, sometimes producers, they might scout for talent on their own if they want to find an up-and-coming artist. And then they have connections to management companies and stuff, and they might try to set someone up, help them get a record deal. Or they might have their own kind of management companies. Some of that stuff is kind of sketchy. I think, if y'all are familiar with the story of Kesha and Dr. Luke, she started working with Dr. Luke really early on, and then he had the kind of contracts I think she signed with him ended up controlling a lot of aspects of her career. And so that's an example of where the when and the where of their producer artist relationship was more than just that of when we're only working together making music. He ended up having kinds of control in other aspects of her career because I think he signed her to his own imprint label or either that or some sort of management stuff. So the way that works is, how do producers get paid is they get paid a royalty, which comes out of the artist share in a traditional label deal. But if you are your own label, you pay a royalty to your producer, and then you also usually charge a project fee. So for me, I charge like a flat fee for a song while we're in the recording process, and then if the song makes money, then I should get a certain percentage. So I did a breakdown here. So like on the top level here, you see like the song. We're just going to pretend that they still sell songs for 99 cents, even though the iTunes Music Store doesn't exist anymore. So, like let's say I use like TuneCore and they take 20 cents. This distribution part is a 20 cents taken by the online distributor. And then technically the rest of the money would go to the label. And then the label pays out royalties. So let's say the artist has like a 20% royalty. That's this yellow part here. And then the green part is what's called a mechanical royalty. So for every mechanical reproduction of a song, whether that's like a cassette tape or vinyl or CD or like an MP3, they get 9.1 cents. So like, let's say you sell a vinyl record that has the song on it for $5. They get 9.1 cents, whereas like the artist royalty is 20%. So it's going to be 20% of that, whatever the money, the like wholesale that the label gets. But it also means that, for instance, if the song only sells for like 50 cents or 49 cents, the songwriter still gets 9.1 cents because it's a fixed rate. Kathy, what is the typical percentage of a royalty for the producer of an indie artist when there's no label involved? So I've heard some debates about this. When I consulted my entertainment attorney friend, she told me that it should be somewhere between like 15 to 30%, because historically, okay, so I'm going to get to this in the next section here where you can see all right, Ting, it's nice to meet you. Have a good rest of your night. You can see here that in the last section, the producer royalty in red, it comes out of the artist section. And so I think here I have it as like 5% out of 20%, which is pretty standard. It's usually like 3 to 5%, and then the artist royalty. And so my entertainment attorney friend said, like, well, when the artist is the label and they own 100%, then the proportion of the producer to the artist share should be the same, somewhere between that like 15 to 30%. I think that I think that's fair, because in an independent setting, the producer is probably going to do a lot more work and is probably going to be compensated a lot less in terms of upfront money. And for me, I always think it's a good idea to fairly split and compensate your creative collaborators. As Brandy Carlisle put it, like, what's the point of me having a big house if I can't, have the guys in my band be living next door to me in the same neighborhood, And like the number one reason why I think bands and collaborators often split up is over money, because somebody's getting a lot more than somebody else. If you feel like you can't do what you do without them, then it's important that people know that you're valued in that way too. So there's not really I don't know what the up-to-date current standards are for that. But I think, it's like something you can talk about with your producer, or if you're a producer, with your artist. The next part is the studio or audio engineer, and that's the person with the technical audio skills for the recording process, tracking or mixing or mastering. And, they can do the stuff that you imagine they would. They set up and clean up the space and microphones, and picking what amps you want to use, and how you want to process it, and doing, file management and editing. And again, engineers might have their own studios, but there's also commercial recording studios that hire engineers to work there on staff. And so an example of a workflow on this is, like, I had my own home studio when I worked as a producer in Nashville, and it was small, and we would do tracking for what we call overdubs there. And my friend Iman Nadim, who's the artist Other Tones, she performed at some Slants Foundation events before. She and I co-wrote and I engineered and produced her EP for her. So, she's like a big pop punk rock art, big rock music. So we had tracked live drums and we rented a studio that has like a really big mixing board, has lots and lots of microphones and lots of drum sets so that we could just spend a day recording the drums for like 5 songs. And then after that, we recorded all of the rest of the stuff, the vocals, the bass, the electric guitar, the synths, the background vocals. We did that in my overdub studio at my home place so that, because like the cost of like a full studio where you could do drums and tracking like that, it's like $250, $300 a day. Whereas like for me, since my studio is smaller as an overdub studio, I only charge $50 a day. And, big studios. I worked at some big recording studios, like professional recording studios for a while. They have staff engineers. So like someone comes and they don't have an engineer they want to work with specifically, they'll just assign a staff engineer to help kind of like navigate things for you. But like a lot of the big artists, they have engineers they work with all the time. And so they bring their own person to kind of like be the architect of the technical stuff. And they're used during the recording process, And like I said, if you want to be an audio engineer, you can be a staff engineer at one of these studios when you get paid a salary, or you might get paid a day rate for special certain kinds of gigs or hour rates. And then a freelance engineer books projects and then will either get paid hourly or by day rate. So my day rate, as an audio engineer is like $200 a day. And that's what I would charge people when they wanted to hire me to work as an audio engineer. Then there's session musicians, and that's like the person that you hire to play the instruments or sing on your session. So, let's say you have a band and, you have all these people you want to, or like in the case of Aman, she like played most of the instruments on her own record, but she wanted to hire some people for certain things. So she hired a drummer to do the drumming on that, and that person is a session musician. And he had like it's a very different experience to record as a session musician because oftentimes you're part of the creative process in this recording, and you're asked to try different things kind of on the fly. They might do a take and then there's like, oh, can you change this fill here? Can you overdub or redo this one patch? It's very different than when you go out on a stage and then you just perform a song start to end and then it's over. There's a kind of finickiness and like an art to studio recording that sometimes not everyone, it's just a learning process. It's not to say that like live musicians aren't great session musicians, but there are people who specialize, who are really, really good at what they do in the studio. And because it is its own experience and it is its own set of skills. And when do you meet or use or need them? Well, when you're in this writing and recording process. Again, session musicians usually get paid, they can get paid hourly or by the song or as a day rate. But historically, they don't receive royalties or songwriting credits. Otherwise, they would be called songwriters, and they get that like explicitly named or negotiated. But like we talk a lot about this, is this ethical? If someone contributes so much creatively to the work, shouldn't they benefit from it if a song gets really popular? That's the difference between like a band, like let's say U2, like they have four guys, and if they make music, they should split the money together, the 4 of them. But if you have a band which is just like one guy, and then he hires 3 other guys to play for him when he records it, but then when he tours or he plays other stuff, like those people are interchangeable. Maybe you are the person that crafted a specific lick or a specific motif within the music, and then every other player emulates what you did, but aren't you technically like part of this creative process? Aren't you like kind of writing the song in the traditional sense of the way that copyright works? You're not credited for that. So, I think like in terms of what are just and equitable ways to compensate people, Like that's a discussion that, it's definitely up for discussion in terms of like, you don't have to do it the way that it's always been done. And I've talked to a lot of musicians and artists who've felt like, well, I think that this song wouldn't be what it is without these session musicians. So I want to give them a part of the songwriting. So here's an example of like a theoretical recording budget for 2 songs in 1 day. So you can see that the studio I put as like $300 a day, and then the engineer was a day rate for one. And then each of these session musicians and the producer, this is a per song rate. So, they charge $100 per song. And then because there's 2 songs, it comes out like this. The last thing I just want to touch on, because I didn't get into a lot, is like live production and touring. So like, there's live audio engineers too, as well as like tour managers and such. And that stuff only happens really like in touring when people are performing a lot. And yeah, you need to do a lot of prep work before all that happens to make sure everyone has what they need once they're on the road. But specifically, it's kind of like isolated to the world of booking, and people get paid. Like when I used to do live sound gigs, I would get paid hourly if it were in town. Like, oh, this bar is having a show tonight for 3 hours, like come in and pay. And then for day rate, like, my roommates, they were touring staff. So like they're all on the road, like they have to wake up, and then they have to load in, and then they have to set up everything, and then they run the show, and then they take it down, and then they move to a next city. They do the same thing. They get paid day rates, and also like there's per diem, where there's covered food and lodging if you're out of town work. So, sometimes people have overlap. Like I know, a lot of audio engineers who were part of creating the sound for a band in the studio, and then they also did live work. So when they decided to go on tour, they decided to bring that same audio person out with them on the road, since they already knew the intricacies of how their music was set up. And Bao like greatly noted here that like a lot of day session musicians record themselves at home studios, and they can get work on online marketplace sites. So yeah, like I have a friend who's a drummer and audio engineer. He studied audio engineering in college in Nashville, and his whole thing is like, okay, just send me the song, and then he will like engineer and play all the tracks and edit all the drums for you, and so that you don't have to book a specific studio and hire all these other people. And if someone's doing all that extra work, they have to invest infrastructure. They have to buy microphones, and they have to buy interfaces, and they have to buy editing software. And so you should pay them more money, because you're not having to pay for a recording studio and an engineer and all these other things. In the same way, if you are a session musician and you develop those capabilities, like you can charge more than you would if you just have to show up and play your guitar and then you can leave. Like obviously you make less money than like you set everything up and you record it and you edit it and then you do all these things yourself. So that is the end of all of my slides. That was a lot of information. I hope that it's able to be digested, and then I can also share this this PowerPoint in the notes. And I'd love to, if there's any questions or things you have follow up or want to clarify on, definitely feel free to speak up now.
Hey, so actually I have a question that's kind of related. So I wanted to know how like the artwork for music goes. Like how does that fit into all of this? Like digital or like pictures, like visual artwork.
Yeah. So that happens, I guess you would say, like on a macro way, like in the marketing end. Obviously people with different creative processes, they might start the artwork earlier, but usually, that doesn't happen until after the record is done or mostly done and recorded. And then they start to think about, the album name and like how they're going to put it out and all those sorts of things. Are you asking as someone who's interested in doing the visual stuff, or somebody who wants to find people to do visual stuff, or both?
Art, but I have no idea how that works in terms of music because right now I just do it as a
Okay.
hobby. So I'm interested in knowing how that works.
Yeah. So, one of my friends, her name's Mimi. Her artist name is Melanin, and she just put out her first debut single, and she didn't do the artwork herself. She found a graphic designer and worked with them to create an album cover, as well as kind of like a bunch of graphics as like promotional vehicles for her to post. And so what she did was she created like a mood board, like a Pinterest mood board. A lot of graphic designers and artists often ask for people to like, what are some aesthetics or ideas or tones that you want? And she found an artist that she, like a visual artist that she liked, and then she shared some of her vision with her, and then they worked together to and then she paid her specifically for the services. And that's similar to the way that I think in general graphic artists and designers tend to do their work. I think Bao does a lot of that stuff, so I'm gonna, if you want to chime in here with,
Yeah,
because I don't do
yeah, I can add detail to your answer, but your answer is a lot correct already. But I think most in the old music industry, a lot of the labels either had an agency or an in-house design team to take care of. Basically, they just crank out like, several record covers a day or whatever. These days, a lot of people are releasing stuff themselves, and similar to the session musicians where you can just call in a drummer or whatever. A lot of us now can just hire somebody off of an online marketplace site such as Upwork or Fiverr or whatever. And a lot of times people grab existing artwork as well that exists on like stock image websites. But yeah, I think the larger productions kind of have their own in-house team, or they look out for freelance artists.
Cool, good to know.
SueAnn, do you know much about like staff writers versus just like songwriters that are called in via publishing companies? Like there's a lot of staff writers that are just signed to exclusive deals for a pub company, and usually those deals are pretty shitty.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like, I mean, that stuff doesn't happen as much anymore, where you just get paid a salary, and then everything you write, you don't really get money off of if it becomes successful or not. I think like a lot that happened a lot more kind of like in the Brill building days, in like Tin Pan Alley, where I think the music industry today is really different, where oftentimes writers, like if you're just a writer and you don't have any other creative relationships and you just want to sit in a room and write all day, and it doesn't matter to you whether your songs are successful or not, or they get recorded, then like then yeah, maybe that works for you. But most artists today, they want to write, or most songwriters, they want to write with other people, and they have creative relationships. So if they were even to leave a publishing company and go off on their own, they could still get music made a lot of the time. But those staff writer jobs are a lot less. I think if you work for like a company that makes jingles, it's likely that might happen more so, because like the commercial stuff tends to pay like for instance, if like Tostino's wants to write a theme song for pizza rolls for a commercial, they're just going to pay what's called a work for hire, which means they just pay like kind of like the graphic designer or the session work thing. They just pay a flat fee for that, and then they own the song and the person who wrote it doesn't keep copyright or get royalties on it. Because I mean, maybe today you would have a viral hit about Totino's pizza rolls on Spotify. Anything is possible. But if it's just going to plan an ad campaign, then the likelihood of, there being enough kind of like revenue from the recorded music to be worth getting royalties, it's way better to just get the work for hire pay. Most composing gigs for like film and TV are work for hire. So that's kind of like similar to the staff writer position, where they might just have like a composer who does all the background music for like a TV show. And, that music's, it makes more sense to get paid a salary for that with the way that the work structure does. Because like you're not really writing songs, you're just writing like themes maybe that go in and out. So yeah, those are really shitty deals usually. I mean, sometimes it can work for you if you don't want to deal with the royalty stuff, but I think in general it's really important for artists to be able to have like intellectual property control of their own work. And I think it's actually a really big justice issue, because a lot of times, especially when you look at the history of the recording industry, there's a lot of exploitation by businesses, which are usually run by like rich, powerful white men, using artists of color and then making lots of money off of them and owning all of their creative work. And many of those artists dying in squalor because they didn't have the control over their own work. So Kathy has some questions. What's a reasonable hourly rate for consulting and artist managers? And at what stage would it be helpful for an early artist to have a consulting or artist manager? I think for me, I kind of work on a sliding scale, because I don't want to bankrupt an artist, but it's also all my time and the education and the experience that I have is valuable. So like $30 an hour is usually what I charge these days for consulting. Like there was a woman I'm friends with, and her like 20-year-old daughter wanted to be a recording artist, and she kind of got caught up with this producer out in Japan who was like making all these promises and like just some kind of shady behavior. So I kind of sat down with her and she told me her whole situation. And then I kind of was like, these are the things you need to like look out for, you need to worry about. And these are the things you need to negotiate in terms of like, you're writing and recording all this music with this producer guy, but like, does he own it? Are you co-owning it? Of the stuff you're writing, does he own it? Or do you, like these are important things you need to ask early on, because early, you might be like, oh, well, I just don't want to like harsh the vibe and like, but if they respect you, they're going to want to make sure that you're happy with the arrangement too, and they want to keep working with you. But if this guy just wants to exploit like a talented young woman so that he can make a lot of money off of her, then these are the warning signs to look for. And so I ended up charging her about $30 US dollars like an hour, and that guy ended up being kind of skeezy. So I don't know. I think it's kind of worth it. Just maybe we have saved some heartache later on. And I do think if there's like questions or money on the table, it's good to have somebody who's experienced. And I like what I told her was like, listen, with me, you're paying me $30 an hour. That's where I'm getting my money. Whereas like all the advice you're getting from this like creepy older producer guy, like he's not transparent about all the money he's spending on you. And he's spending all his money on recording studios and things like that. Like, well, where is he getting his money? Like, where is his motivation for this? It's with the expectation he's going to make a lot of money off of you in the future. So I think like sometimes it can be helpful to kind of think about it in that terms, though, like you don't want to be cynical in all your creative relationships, but I think it's helpful sometimes to think like, how is this person going to be taken care of? How am I going to be taken care of? How are we going to make sure that everybody doesn't feel exploited from these relationships? Because, obviously if you really care about each other, you don't want that to happen. All right. And then from Nathan, for someone who's starting out, is there any type of job in the industry that you can sort of suggest that can give a stable income, or is it necessary to get a job outside of music to support yourself? Okay, so the jobs that are kind of stable and have salary and income are very competitive to get because there are very few, and they usually pay not very much money. So, I had a bunch of my classmates who were trying to angle to get like that staff engineer job at a recording studio. Maybe they're making like $25,000 a year, and they're definitely like working at Starbucks on the weekends to also, because like they can't live on $25,000 a year and pay their student loans. I have friends who are working as assistants to executives at major record companies. They're probably making somewhere between like 30 to 40,000 a year, maybe, if they're lucky. In New York, you might make a little bit more because the cost of living is so high they can't afford to pay you like I mean, it's still a poverty wage, but like, the poverty wage is higher in New York than it is in Nashville. So that's what's really hard about the industry is like usually you're trading stability for a cut in income, or you'll have the potential for more income, but you might be freelance and that might not necessarily become stable until you build a career of a certain type. So like I realized really early on that working at like a major recording studio, I would make very, very little amounts of money, and it would be very difficult for me to get those jobs because there's like 50 people trying to get one job at one time, and they all have education, they all have connections, they all have experience. And they just expect you to have no life, to just be on call 24/7 and to do that. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to ask yourself, like, what is it you want? And what are you willing to give for that? And for me, the way I was able to kind of piece together stable income is I did a couple different things. I did music videos. I would record live music videos and edit them and mix the audio. I'd produce, I'd engineer. I also would like work as a nanny or a babysitter. That was kind of my side gig for like, I could always get more nannying money if I needed to, but I could also kind of turn down babysitting gigs if I had a lot of recording sessions that month and I was doing okay. I do think it's good to have like a flexible, stable way to get money when you're early on in your career, because you can't always count on it. And I know so many guys who like invested thousands of dollars in so much recording equipment and guitars and gear because they thought, oh, if I have all this stuff, then I can get clients and I can start making music. But they didn't have those relationships yet. They didn't have the experience and the clientele to kind of like, really support all the debt that they were, to justify the debt they were going into. And in the end, they ended up having to sell all their gear in order to pay their bills. And then they couldn't work in that way anymore. And they had to pivot to doing other kinds of work. So I do think it's really important to figure out yourself as like a business, how you're going to survive, how you're going to make money. Maybe like you need to do something that you can get stable income in while you build your career, and then you can phase it out. Before I left Nashville, I had actually kind of reached the point where I didn't really need to do babysitting and nannying anymore to pay my bills. I was making enough steady like money doing producing and engineering work to cover my expenses. So you can get a job at a management company, you can get a job at a publishing company, you can get a job at a label, you can get a job at an agency, but the demands that they have of you are really, really high when you're starting out. So I'm never going to tell anybody not to do it, but I also think like it's hard when you're kind of youthful idealism and lots of energy, and then you start to realize like, oh, I'm really burned out, and these people kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of people with big egos in the industry, so sometimes they kind of like require bootlicking in order for you to like get anywhere. And after a while you kind of realize like, I don't really want to subject myself, and I don't really want anyone to be subjected or have this kind of bootlicking behavior justified. And if you're a person of color and like a minority in other ways, it's even harder, because like you have to put up with all sorts of things. Like my first day as an intern at this like recording studio, the artists and all the session, I was all white guys. I was the only person of color, and I was the only woman in the whole room, and I was an intern, and I was the lowest person in the hierarchy, and it was my first day. And I remember the guys, he were like, they're like playing like a lick on the guitar, like, is that gay? Is that gay? And they kept using gay in this derogatory way, and I was like, oh, I really want to like say something, be like, guys, like don't use gay to describe something that's bad. And then, and then like an hour or two into it, my boss was like, you know, the thing about Orientals, and I was like, okay, this is a line. Like I can't, and I was like, you know, I know you probably don't mean to use it in like a, I know you mean trying to say a positive thing, like you think Oriental people are really good at music, but like, please don't use that term because it's really offensive. You know, just say like East Asian or something. And thankfully, you know, like he didn't lash out at me. He was a overall pretty nice dude, but you know, in certain settings, like you would feel like, oh, I have to put up with this or else I'm gonna get fired and I'm gonna lose this opportunity. And sometimes it doesn't feel worth it. So, you know, everyone kind of has to figure out for themselves how they want to deal with that. I mean, there are lots of really good people, really like humble and talented and generous people, creative people too. But as in any industry that is highly competitive, you know, it's just a lot of struggles to kind of act like you're impenetrable and constantly available and like have endless energy when the reality is like we're all human and we don't. And some of us don't have like trust funds or parents paying for our rent and our food all the time, you know, so that the only thing we can devote our time and energy and focus on is an internship. You know, like I had friends whose parents were perfectly happy to pay for everything during that time. And so they could just do a non-paying internship and, you know, spend all their time waiting around for their golden ticket to come. And then for some people, they had student loans to pay, and or even more so, they felt like they needed to earn money to take care of their family, to send money home. So they were like, I don't know if I can do this. I can't just take a non-paying intern job and work 20-hour days for, you know, forever and wait for the day that I can finally get a job. Any other questions?
All right, can I add to your answer a little bit, SueAnn? I just wanted to say
Yeah, go for
it. The ecosystem is really huge in entertainment and music. And so there's a lot of non-creative or like creative adjacent roles that you can take on as well that kind of puts you in the room with people and maybe gets you closer to the opportunities that you want to have as a creative. So, you know, just like every other industry, there are accountants, there are every sort of role in any industry is also in the entertainment industry. And so if you want to kind of be adjacent to that sort of career, you can also look into like non-creative roles as a starting point.
Oh, I guess like the happy ending to my like oppression in the industry story is like I started to be more intentional about who I wanted to spend time with, who I wanted to work with and collaborate with. And, you know, I started to specifically seek out, you know, other people of color, especially Asian Americans. And we created kind of our own oasis in like, you know, the white desert. And and those became really, really fulfilling creative relationships and friendships, you know, where we were able to trust each other and to share. And, you know, I think a big part of why we want to do stuff like Artist Think Tank is we want to, you know, demystify a bunch of the stuff that we wish somebody had told us early on, but also we want y'all to meet each other and to be able to kind of like build your own communities and production crews and so that it's like we don't have to rely on existing power structures. So all right, it's bye. Crystal's gone, but bye. Cool. Kathy, can you speak to some entryways to the non-creative, creative adjacent business roles, such as marketing or paths to becoming an executive in the music industry? So usually to get your foot in the door, you have to start with an internship. And then you start, you know, you usually need to live in one of the big hubs. And then in addition to, you know, the work that you might do, there's also like industry networking events and stuff like that. And Like, I think that, you know, one other way is I think it's actually a lot of times easier to start your own company than to try to climb a corporate ladder. Because usually the people at the top are there because they created something. So I think, like, you know, I talked about management and I talked about booking stuff. Like, you know, that stuff you can actually start doing at scale really early on. Like, if you find other artists and stuff that are interesting and that you want to support in different ways, like, you can take on those roles. Like, you're like, hey, like, you know, I know, like, you really hate this administrative stuff. Like, what if I do some of the management work, or I try to book you some shows, and then you're like, well, I'll just take like if I book you a show, like, can I, like, I'll take 10% of that, you know? And then you're a booking agent. Like, I had a friend who started her own booking company, which is just her. And she did house shows because that was kind of like an up and coming thing like 10 years ago. And so she actually started booking entire tours for indie artists as like house show tours. And she had a whole database of people who had hosted house shows, who loved hosting house shows. And she would help, like, make a schedule and a map, right? Like, where are they going to go from what city to what city, what time, and where are they going to play, where are they going to stay? And that's one way that she basically got her own booking company off the ground. And she, you know, she took the 10% from what the artist would make on the show. I think, like, you know, in terms of learning, if you're going to do the creative adjacent, non-creative business roles, you really need to understand how the business works in order to do it. But I also think, like, people sometimes have, like, instinct and talent for it too, not just like music talent, but like business talent and instinct. And that's really impressive too, because, like, there's a lot of things that people are like, oh, I can sense that, like, this is a need, or this is something that people, like, a lot of times business is about fulfilling a need that is existing. And if you can figure out a way to do that better or more effectively or sustainably, then, you know, I do think artists need people by their sides who can do the non-creative stuff, because it's not for everybody, you know? And I do think, like, for those of us who love music and want to support artists, like, one of the best things you can do is to be like a non-exploitative business person, right? Like, artists need people they can trust, who, like, really care about music. And, you know, in the end, if you can make money together, you know, so that nobody's labor is exploited, neither yours nor theirs, like, that can be a mutually beneficial relationship. I do think what's hard is sometimes artists, if they have big egos, they feel entitled to other people doing things for them. And so, like, I have friends who put a lot of time in trying to, like, help artists get their career off the ground and trying to manage them. And then once that artist started to have success because they were working together on these things, they dropped them and they, like, tried to use one bigger name. It's like, well, if the reason why you got here is because you work together, like, shouldn't you reward somebody, you know, by staying together? Or, you know, if it's the right fit, and, like, once you actually start making money, you hire someone else and pay them. Like, why didn't you pay them when they were helping you out from before? So, you know, sometimes those relationships go both ways. People hear a lot more stories about management exploiting artists, because out of the famous artists, there's so many stories of really exploitative management. But I've also seen a lot of examples of aspiring young idealistic managers working with artists who kind of take them for granted and use all of their business labor, and then kind of just be like, who? Once they start to get attention from bigger name people. So, any other questions? Nathan, if you're interested in kind of hearing more about Asian American freelancers and job stuff, like, there's a podcast that I edit. It's one of my side gigs. It's called Chief Executive Auntie, CEA, and it's all about Asian American. It's all interviews with Asian Americans who have kind of non-traditional job paths and do a lot of freelancing work, and, like, how to make a budget and how do you charge a client, and, like, managing your financial forecasts. And it's a lot of really interesting entrepreneurs and creatives and stuff. So I know she offers a lot of tools for people who really want to make sure they have their finances sorted out before they take a risky creative venture. So definitely check chief executive auntie out. Yeah, and yeah, Bao just shared like we both have loads of friends who work in entertainment industry don't who aren't performers. You know, they do all the other stuff, and those people are really needed too. I think like there's one way to do it where like, oh, if you're into design and you're into marketing and accounting, you can just go to school for that, or if you already have experience with that, or you can do the music stuff and then you can acquire those other skills. So for me, I study music business, and that was my way to get into the music industry, but also to learn the business stuff too at the same time. A lot of times the reason why I had the jobs or the gigs that I did was because I was proximate and I had relationships to artists, and then I like figured out or I acquired the skills like, you know, social media management or designing, or like really like I do really basic accounting. I don't do like GAT or anything CPA-ish, but I can make a budget on a spreadsheet, you know. Just being able to do that, right? Like, you know, I'm proximate to these artists, and then I can offer these business services to them in a way that that like maybe they don't always feel like they have access to. So, yeah, my friend Jennifer Dwanfaltz, she's the host of that podcast, and she's like, I'm the chief executive auntie. So I'd love to hear more about everybody and like what you've been doing, what you're interested in, whether it's just like, oh, I like this kind of music, or I'm interested in learning more about, you know, how to do this thing, or these are skills I want to learn. If y'all don't mind sharing.
Yeah, I can go first. So I am a songwriter. I'm also a artist and singer, and I've been writing for like the last 4 years. My day job is in marketing, and I am just really interested in like continuing to like develop both my songwriting and artist careers. And I've found that like, yeah, it's like definitely, I feel like there aren't that many Asian Americans in it. And that was also like one of the layers of feeling a little bit like, oh, there's so many like white people in this industry. And I definitely feel that layer of like, oh, I don't even belong even more. So I'm always like excited to come to these events and learn more from like Asian American artists and um, music entrepreneurs and freelancers who also can share advice on like how to be Asian American in this industry.
So, um, I haven't like I can't say I've been making music seriously at all at any point, but this past year or so, I've been putting more hours into just exploring how music is made. Uh, I'm teaching myself music production, mixing, mastering, and sound design. And I just bought a keyboard a month or two ago, so I'm going to be teaching myself how to play keyboard once I have a little bit more free time. It's really interesting hearing about how the music industry works because I work in the film industry. I work as a grip, so I do lighting equipment. I also do visual effects, and so graphic art is kind of like something I'm familiar with, although I'm not really a graphic artist. Actually, I technically still work at an audiovisual company, so I'm kind of like a roadie in that I set up equipment for like live music events, but I stay within Southern California. I don't go out to other states. So that's like the most related I am to anything in the music industry. It's really interesting because I've heard of like agents and managers because that's stuff in the film industry that I'm familiar with. But there's other things like booking managers, which is like very new to me. It's just been very interesting to learn about all that. And yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, working in film and already doing a lot of like creative technical stuff, it's it's a big step, like what's the word I'm looking for? It's a step up. It's a big help. I'm actually technically a film director. I put out a feature-length documentary a couple years ago, and I didn't study anything in film, but my background in like the technical aspects of music production and audio engineering actually gave me a lot of the technical skills that helped me to kind of like build on what I already knew to put out a film. So just like keep at it. And I think like a great way to think about like questions to ask yourself are like, what are skills that I want to acquire, things I want to learn, and also like who are people like that I want to meet, right? Like it doesn't have to be like famous people or artists or something like that. It could be like, I want to meet more bass players, or I want to meet more like people who do making like tracks and do electronic music. I want to meet more people who do mixing. I want to meet people who are interested in this kind of genre or in this, or have do this kind of thing. Or I want to find people that I can write with. Like those are some important like questions and things to ask yourself. It can kind of guide you in terms of like, okay, where should I move from here?
Um, I don't know. Can you see my video? Okay, awesome. Hi, SueAnn, thanks so much for today's session. Sorry, I kind of like came in a little bit later, but to talk about where I'm at right now. So, I'm also a singer songwriter. Like Kathy. Kathy and I know each other very well. And I guess in terms of like where I'm at for music, I recently just completed like a crowdfunding project to like fund my first like album. And but it's going to be recorded in the fall. So until then, I've been trying to like figure out like what can I do. So I've been trying to work on music on my own, but like I'm like, oh, it's hard doing music on my own, and just like trying to get the motivation. I need to still watch that Slants video about productivity as an artist because I really don't got that. um but yeah, in terms of like where I'm at for a stable job, I just started an internship but for a very, very long time have been very unemployed. So that's where I've been at.
Well, congratulations on your crowdfunding. That's a lot. I know that that's a lot of work unto itself, because that's actually how I finance my film, is I use crowdfunding. And that's like, you have all the songs written and stuff for your album already, or are you in the process of writing that still?
Almost all of them are written. They're based off of like my senior thesis show that I had when I was in college. It was my show about like me playing different Asian American stereotypes. So each person had a song, or each stereotype had a song. But yeah, I still need to write it. It was a little bit messy on some songs, so I need to fix that stuff.
So you said you're planning on recording in the fall. Like, who are you working with, and like, are you doing the recording yourself? Are you working with engineer, studio? Do you have producers, like other collaborators, musicians? Like, please feel free to share with us. Like,
Yeah, sure. I was lucky that one of my friends saw this ad on Facebook for a recording studio that specializes in helping small artists crowdfund their album. So they're called Plaid Dog Recording, and they're based in Massachusetts. So they've had a history of like, working with small artists, organize their crowdfunding campaigns, and it sent for, at least for in most models for crowdfunding, most of the money, I guess, seems to come from people within your network. So it was like a lot of them helping me sort out like, who are some people in my network? What are their emails? How do I send these emails to them? And for the last, maybe from February to April, I was like kind of like collecting things. I was like, working on my social media to try to like promote it and stuff. But Yes, they're a really cool company. So like they still, all the music I have ownership of all the music rights. They have ownership of the crowdfunding campaign, and I guess of course all the money, most of it essentially goes back to the studio because they're in charge of them. They have a producer, a mixer, they have gig musicians too. But yeah, that's where I got started for the crowdfunding campaign.
Yeah, so it sounds like they are producing this record for you, right? Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
and doing a lot of the that we talked about producers doing. And I used to be an assistant for a producer who did really similar things. He, you know, he was a Christian artist and producer, and so a lot of times he would work with like someone from a small town, maybe a worship leader, to record an album, and he would help them organize all their stuff together for a crowdfunding. He would make the budget. He would make a budget for them, right, so that they knew how much money they needed to crowdfund for. And then he would. And part of budgeting is like knowing where you're going to record and who you're going to record with, and how many days you're going to need in the schedule, and all those sorts of things. So what's mixing and who's going to mix and master, and how much is that going to cost per song. So yeah, like a lot of times like I mentioned before, artists are independent now, but like their needs are a lot of times the same. So that's the kind of stuff that maybe used to be managed by a record label that independent artists now have producers or managers end up managing instead on the indie side. And it ends up sometimes a lot of times it does benefit the artist because they get to maintain ownership and more control over what they have, but they don't need to necessarily like literally do every single thing by themselves either.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Oh
good
yeah.
luck and good luck. I hope this process goes really well for you, and that you have everything you need to kind of like make the album that you want.
Oh, thank you so much. I probably might want to follow up with you on some advice for figuring that stuff out, if that's all right.
No problem. That's great. Well, if there isn't any aren't any other questions or things people want to talk about, we might wrap it up for tonight. But obviously, like if you have something, speak.
I'm also curious in general, like, what would your advice be for, like people who are starting off as songwriters and artists who are kind of early? What do you think are like important things to think about, or like next steps that you think we should be paying attention to or doing?
So I think it's important to have like a business plan or a strategy, because every artist is basically their own small business. And I think like my sister, she was really into music stuff early on, but she never really formed a business plan. I also know like a lot of other artists, like I knew this band back in Nashville. They were super talented. They also did a Kickstarter to fund their first record. They put it out. The music was so good. The band was tight. They played so many shows locally, and then it just stagnated, right? It was just like, oh, we finally have the album that we've been working on for so long, and we're playing so many live shows, and we have kind of like a core fan base. And they were trying things like trying to get on the local radio station, but there wasn't a big picture. There wasn't a strategy. It's kind of like, you're in a boat and you just keep paddling and paddling, but you don't know where you're going. There's no plan. And I think like a lot of artists sometimes are like, I'm working so hard, but I'm not getting anywhere. It's like, well, you need a plan, you need a strategy. And I don't want people to waste their energy just like being like, if you just work hard, it's not enough to just work hard. You got to work smart. And I know so many young artists who are such hard workers and so creative, but sometimes like they're not seeing the bigger picture of like, how do I steer this? Where is this going to go? How do I not just like put in an album? How do I have a career? Right. So I think like that would be my big advice to someone starting out, is to kind of have a vision for that. a vision, and then also to figure out how you want to get there. Like, I had an artist that I was consulting and managing for a bit, and she told me she wanted to be the next Tori Kelly, you know? And so her goal was to try to put out YouTube videos and do covers the same way that Tori Kelly had done it. And I told her, I was like, honey, like, you can't be the next Tori Kelly because Tori Kelly is busy being Tori Kelly. And the era of kind of like YouTuber cover people is almost over now because the market is so saturated with these cover artists. It's really hard to penetrate these algorithms anymore. You know, all like maybe if you have a really fun and creative video that goes viral, then yeah, like you can do that. But you know, the question of like, okay, you want to put out YouTube videos that are covers, but like you don't know how to play instruments, you don't know how to do audio or video editing, so you're paying me and other people hundreds of dollars to put out one video. Like her goal was just to put out one video, to write and record one original song, and like though it was very short term, right? It was like, yeah, it's great that you want to like put out this cover video, it's great that you want to, you know, finally record this original song of yours, but what is it building towards? It's like, oh, well, I just like, you know, I'm just like, you know how Tori Kelly got where she is. She had to put out hundreds of cover videos, you know, for years before she got a record deal and she got managed by Braun and started doing her own original stuff. And it's going to take a lot more money and a lot more time than I think you necessarily are willing to invest in this way. You know, just because somebody else did it this way doesn't mean that's what's best for you, for your skill set, for your genre, for your stage of life. So I think it's really important to make a plan that specifically fits your life. For instance, okay, so Nathan's asking what's an example of a concrete vision versus having no plan. So I just gave you examples of like two or three artists I knew who had no plan. And an example of someone who had a plan was my friend Haley from the band The Harmonies. And she's the girl I told you about who did all of her own booking really early on. We were the same year of college at Belmont, and she had a band. They had recorded their first EP, and then she had a goal. They were recording a certain amount of like live videos. Some were covers, some were originals, and then they were touring. And so she was like booking these stretches of tours, like periodically, even during the school year. They would go out on the road for like 2 weeks and then like come back. And all of that was like, you build a fan base and an email list. And that way, once you start to build enough grassroots support and you get, you know, you're growing your fan base, then you can start to get like energy and buzz. If any of you have ever heard of like the power of 1,000 true fans, it's like this concept. I don't know if it's a Seth Godin thing, but the idea is that in order to make a living as a blue collar working class musician, you need 1,000 like dedicated fans. And if you have 1,000 dedicated fans and they spend on average like $30 a year, then you make $30,000 a year, right, on you. And you don't need to like tens and thousands. You don't need hundreds of thousands. Like you need 1,000 fans. Like if you play shows in these cities, there are people who are going to come and they're going to buy tickets and they're going to buy merch and they're going to tell their friends. And that's an example of a strategy where it's like, okay, I need to build up a fan base. You know, I'm not just going to like throw content into the internet ether, hope that it sticks somewhere, but specifically thinking targeting, like who is my audience? Who are other bands or artists that are like me? What are blogs or podcasts or radio shows or playlists that they're on? Do I want to get on those playlists? Do I want to get on those podcasts? Who are people I want to work with? Like, you know, like eventually Haley's band, they ended up getting a booking agent, right? And they ended up moving to, you know, working with more famous, more powerful producers and management companies. And, you know, they like the albums, the EPs, the tours, like, yeah, they were great to put out, but they were all building to something bigger, which is like a life that's sustainable where they don't have to work at the fried chicken place anymore. When they're not on the road, they can just make music. Does that make sense in terms of like the difference between the plan versus like just throwing stuff into the internet ether? It's so great to meet you, Vishesh. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think I was watching this workshop that said like, you know, you need to develop these fans as opposed to just waiting. I guess like most people have this idea. I also maybe had this idea before of just like, you just need that one big thing to go viral and everything's set. But no, you need to actually, and also things going viral, it's not even in control, I think. It's like you needing to make sure you build that fan base, and I guess it's just daunting to try to do that on your own. So I guess, is that where like having the connections of like a producer or needing to get like needing to get a manager to help you manage that? Or
I think like a producer, you know, they focus on the music stuff and maybe they can help throw some ideas around. If, you know, ultimately that's more the stuff of a manager would deal with. Like we were talking about long-term vision and plan and strategy. A booking agent, you know, maybe they will contribute to helping you craft a plan based on like, how does this booking fit into the larger vision? But that's like they're, you know, what they're in charge of is really just like, what shows are you playing where? I think, you know, when you're an indie artist, it's all kind of connected. Like, you know, my friends, they created this targeted email like geography model. Basically, they get the emails and the zip codes of fans, and they build an email list, and then they know where their fans are in the country. So like this guy was like, oh, I have like 100 fans in San Diego. I've never played a show in San Diego. So he can book a show there, and then he can send an email to all these people who are on his email list. And then they like, if half of those people should come up to the show, that's a pretty good show. 50 people show up, right? You know, that's a difference than just like, I'm just going to book all these shows to book them. Like what, you know, yeah, like when you start out, you're always going to be playing a bunch of empty rooms. That's inevitable. And then, you know, maybe a few people tell a few people, but also like the whole thing about like, you're working so hard, but like, where's the energy going? Is it building towards something? Like, it's like what you were just saying earlier. Yeah. Like there's this idea that you just need one big thing to go viral, but you know, yesterday's newspaper is in the trash and hopefully in the recycling. And, and it's, you know, maybe you're the big thing today, but that doesn't always translate to like people supporting your career and buying your music or going to see you, you know, tomorrow or the next day or staying up with you. And in order to do that, it's really important to build a relationship with your fan base, to like have a community with them and not just see them as kind of like faceless consumers, you know, like that's why like stuff like Patreon has been really successful, because there are fans and supporters who are interested in the artist and they want to be a community that supports them, and then they also get to like be a part of this process together. So I think like, you know, it's a pretty reasonable plan to like to get a Patreon and then be like, oh, I want to have this many community supporters supporting me, this many dollars a month, and I want to, you know, share a song with them a month, you know, or I want to do these things to keep them involved in my process. And like, it's those sorts of like community relationships that you have that are ultimately like, if they're symbiotic, you give them something, they give you something, you both benefit from it. Those are how you sustain a career long term, right? And I think that's like a tool we see in our AAPI communities, right? Like sometimes they're kind of resource poor in terms of like power in the Americans kind of sense, but the way that we survive is our communities, the way that we take care of each other, you know, when there's resources or food or money or all sorts of things, like there's a lot that you don't need a lot, you just need people. You don't need a lot of fans. You don't need a lot of people. You just need like a solid group to be there for each other, to care for one another, to survive. Geography map tool. So if you use some email marketing, they allow you to input different kinds of data. So like, you know, someone's name and their email address and their zip code and things like that. And then you can kind of be like, I want to use all of the like, within 50 miles of this zip code, you know, all the people whose zip code is within 50 miles of this location, this city, then like I'm going to send an email to them. That's a specific email marketing tool that you can use, and they're usually available on these services. So that's not like a tool they developed on their own. It's like a tool that already exists with email marketing.
Yeah, so you can do like MailChimp, Constant Contact, or any of those services will allow you to input a zip code, and then you can use that data. Kathy, I wanted to like expand on the answer to your question, which was from a writer's perspective, most of your income is going to be royalty based, and there's lots of ways to earn royalties. One is obviously streaming and all of that stuff, right? Your stuff being on Spotify and YouTube and all that. And then there's the licensing side where SueAnn was talking about earlier. That's probably where I've been the most financially successful. And so the plan, I guess, to set yourself up to be able to survive there is, one, document all of your percentage splits as soon as you write the song with somebody. And there's a free app called Splits that you can get, and it'll generate like a list, a PDF. So when you co-write with somebody, you can input that right away. The other thing is just registering your stuff with a performance rights company like BMI or ASCAP, and that's what allows the royalties to get to you. Like they track every play everywhere, even at live concerts. If a person plays your song at a live concert, they'll give you royalties for that. I've been lucky enough to sign with a publisher who does all of the administrative work for me, so I don't have to register my songs and stuff. That takes a lot of time. So if that should be part of your roadmap too, eventually, to get a publisher or at least a publishing admin company who just does all the administrative stuff for you. And they'll usually take 10-15% off of your royalties. But they'll, on the other hand, they have partners and stuff that pitch to Netflix or music supervisors for movies or whatever, and then they can get your song licensed. One of those licenses can bring you thousands of dollars, right? And then you can still earn royalties for years off of the one licensing deal. And so obviously the roadmap should be to identify the styles and the artists that you want to write for, and just cold contact, reach out to those people and try to work with them. For me lately, I've just been investing in artists that I believe in. So I've been working with people who I just think are gonna eventually blow up. So, you know, co-writing with those. And you never know, because I think I've said this in other Slants Foundation think tanks, which is you work with people more successful, less successful, equally successful than you, because you never know who's going to blow up, or you never know whose career is going to like deflate. It happens instantly, right? And so, yeah, if you're going to assemble a roadmap, I think identify the styles and the people involved that you want to get together with. Set yourself up so that you can collect royalties, because as a writer, that's where all your money comes from. And then 3, eventually try to have some other company that takes care of all the business and the crappy part of writing, which is like all the administrative work.
Thanks so
And
much,
PR
Bao.
you can register for even without a publishing deal. So like every songwriter, no matter what stage they're in, like go to like join a PRO, BMI and ASCAP. You can literally just go to their website and then sign up for an account and then become a member of them. CSAC is like a small one. It's kind of invite only, but it doesn't really matter that much. Just pick one, and then BMI or ASCAP, and then you can it's actually an easy place to also register all your songs. And then if there are recordings of your songs, you can kind of be like, oh, this is a song that this is a recording that is like my song, and when they get played, yeah, you'll get performance royalties on that. So like when I was saying earlier about like radio and you know, Spotify streaming stuff, as well as like satellite radio or other things like that. Those all get collected for PROs. PROs actually don't collect for films that are shown in theaters, because like the American film industry, they actually specifically wrote an exception for themselves because they didn't want to pay for money for that. But all the stuff that's streamed online, that has to get reported, and then they have to pay performance royalties for that. So, or if or somebody plays, like my band, I had this like 3-piece punk band for a year and a half, and I wrote like most of the songs for them, and we would play these little dive bars in Nashville. But I would upload for I like BMI. I'm a BMI member, and I interned for them for a little bit. They actually have like a thing called like a catalog thing online, where if you play shows, you can upload your set list, and like you basically say like, oh, I played this venue and this was my set list, and I would get like $10 like in my bank account from the like couple of my songs we played like at these places, because all of those bars, all those venues, they pay a license to these big like BMI or ASCAP and CSAC for all of the music that gets played there. And then they basically divvy up that money to all the songwriters. So yeah, that might be money you might already be making, but that if you don't sign up for that, you don't know how to collect it. There's also sound exchange too.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Bao and SueAnn, for those super detailed answers about songwriting and how to, make a roadmap for a sustainable career. That's really, really good to know. I've been taking notes.
And I think like
Yeah,
knowing when you have a plan and you have like an idea for a career, it can make the like insecurity of the current finances more tolerable, because it's not like the plan isn't for it to always be like this, to make no money and to have no future, right?
Yeah.
The plan is to get to the point where all of your creative work will be paying back to you. So then you can make a plan for like, okay, this day job I'm going to do, it's interim, because then at some point the money I make from like, that's what I did with my producer engineer, audio engineer, is I was like, okay, I want to be a producer, so I need to like start building my studio, I need to start building clients and getting my name out there, and the more recordings I have and the more musicians I meet, the more people I will know who will want to hire me to do these things. But until I get to this point, I'm going to babysit and nanny to pay my bills. Once I started to get enough momentum that I was recording, every month and making money to pay my bills, I didn't need to keep doing that anymore. Like, the idea of being a nanny for like 50 years, it might not appeal to everybody. So, there's nothing wrong with it. There's plenty of joy and plenty of dignity in whatever work you might do. But like, it sometimes can just feel like you're just like treading water, and it's like, no, like figure out where you want to swim to, where you want to go, and then it doesn't always feel like you're just waiting for somebody to come rescue you, someone to discover you, someone for your song to go viral, and like you're just treading water, waiting for that day, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's really important to have a plan.
Yeah, business plan for sure. Who are your audience, who are your customer base, what are your revenue streams, how are you going to get there? Like, it's the business of music, right?
Yeah. Cool.
I'm going to stop the recording now. But I know that the two